Roop looks very confident at this point. DiBiase has sustained an unbelievable amount of pressure. This match it's all on the line right here for Ted DiBiase. It's all on the line right here. And Roop has got the whole of the figure four locked in. DiBiase may be unconscious. DiBiase's out. The referee has stopped the match. The referee's decision goes to Bob Roop. And right here in Mid-South, boy, we've got a new North American champion.
Welcome back to the Wrestling Stoop with the legend himself, Bob Roop. He's going to be joining us here in just a few moments. And of course, as always, I am your co-host, Ray Russell, along for the ride. And I, just like you guys, I cannot wait for more great stories from one Mr. Bob Roop. And as long as we don't get too sidetracked, this week on the show, expect to hear Bob tell that story of Puerto Rico Riot number 2. Of course, we're going to go back in time and talk a little more about the early stages of Bob Roop's professional wrestling career. And I have a few names down here that I want to discuss this week. The main name being Terry Funk. Bob looking to pay his respects to the late, great legend Terry Funk here this week by maybe sharing a story or two. And I can't wait for that. But before we get there, just a quick reminder, guys, that you can listen to the Wrestling Stoop and our sister shows like the Regional Wrestling Podcast, where we talk the territories currently covering the years of 1981 in Georgia Championship Wrestling, 1986 in the Cowboys UWF, and coming soon, it's 1985 in the Memphis wrestling territory. Going to be added to the projects there on Regional Wrestling. And I'm also working on the side doing a tremendous amount of research about the 1970s in the old LaBelle, Los Angeles territory. Talking to a few people, can't wait to bring them on to talk all about the LA promotion and its booming and maybe not so booming years as well. You can also listen to the Wrestling Memory Grenade podcast. The OG, the original podcast here on the brand, just finished up the year of 1987 in the WWF this week on the Wrestling Memory Grenade show as we head into the new year of 1988, moving into WrestleMania 4. And on the way, we'll be looking at more Saturday night's main event, as well as the first ever Royal Rumble event that took place on the USA Network. So much coming very soon. Plus, we'll find out what did the Islanders do to Matilda, the Bulldog. Those questions and more will be answered soon on the Wrestling Memory Grenade podcast. You can also listen to Monday Warfare, the battles within. It's all about the Monday Night War, covering the history of the Monday Night War 1 week at a time. And you can listen to all of those shows and more, all part of the WrestleCopia podcast network located over at WrestleCopia.com. That's WrestleCopia.com, and anywhere your podcast streaming needs are met, from Apple to Spotify, Google, and beyond. And be sure to follow me on social media, guys, for all the latest goings on here at the WrestleCopia Podcast Network. Plus, I'm constantly adding old school video clips and pictures from throughout wrestling history. And you can follow me over on X, the former Twitter. You can follow me there at Wrestling Grenade. That's at RASSLIN Grenade. Also, follow and like me, Facebook.com/Wrestling Grenade. And of course, you can subscribe to my YouTube, guys. Talk about YouTube.com/Wrestling Grenade. And I should also mention that you guys can find Bob Roop himself over on Facebook. Look up his name, Poor Bob Roop, Facebook.com/Poor Bob Roop. Go ahead and friend him there. Bob welcoming new friends all the time. He'd love to hear from each and every one of you. And of course, last but certainly not least, actually just had my computer repaired this weekend, so I could really use your help and reimbursement. Had to get it done to keep these podcasts going. So I'm asking you guys to give it a try, talking about that $5 all-access tier over at patreon.com/WrestleCopia. That address again, patreon.com/WrestleCopia. Get you all sorts of gifts for just $5, including all of my insanely detailed book-like show notes, pages and pages of show notes for every episode of the Regional Wrestling Podcast, The Grenade, and Monday Warfare. You'll also get early access to many of the shows here on WrestleCopia, where you can listen days and sometimes as much as a week earlier than the rest of the listeners. But that's not all. You also get digital downloads for your viewing and reading pleasure, random bonus video drops, remastered versions of the earliest episodes of the WrestleCopia podcast, which include enhanced sound quality, plus new content and conversation never heard before. And of course, you get our Patreon exclusive watch-along series covering many past WWF and WCW events. And you get all of that for the low, low price of just $5. No subscription, cancel anytime. Give it a try for a month, guys. I think you'll like the content that I offer, and every penny of it goes right back here into paying the bills to keep the WrestleCopia Podcast Network up and running for the months and the years to come. So please, if you have a few bucks to spare, you're looking to support that next up-and-coming podcast brand, please consider making it WrestleCopia. Also, before we get going, let me turn you on to something here this week. Rather, on to someone, I should say. I'm talking about a fellow by the name of Pete Letterberg. And you guys have probably seen some of his photos online, hopefully with the watermark attached. But Pete seemingly has an infinite amount of pictures, photos of just about any and every wrestler you could ever ask for, going all the way back to the 1960s, all the way up to present times. Pete has kindly offered up several great photos of Mr. Bob Roop for us to use in promotional tools here on the Wrestling Stoop. But boy, you talk about ask and ye shall receive. I asked Pete if I could glance at what he had available to choose from, and he sends me, without counting, guys, I'm thinking thousands of pictures of Bob Roop throughout his career, both in color and in black and white. And I've been a little busy on my side to sort through all the photos just yet, but expect to see some great rare shots of Bob Roop here soon. And I strongly encourage anyone who wants great, unique, and rare action photos and promo shots of pretty much any star you can think of throughout wrestling history to hit Pete up. That's Pete Letterberg. That's Lederberg. You can find him on Facebook, and you guys can buy prints of any of his photos. And not only is he on Facebook, you can also email Pete at plmathphoto. That's plmathphoto at hotmail.com. I want to thank you again, Pete. We haven't started using the pictures just yet, but plenty of great shots to come. I guarantee you guys. Pete Letterberg, guys, just a great guy with an insane wrestling photo collection. Take advantage. Contact him today. And now with all of that said and all of that out of the way, it's time to bring him back on the show. It's what you've been waiting for, guys. Week 3 of the Wrestling Stoop, and we can't do without this man. Please welcome back Mr. Bob Roop. Bob, welcome back to the program, and I hope you've had the opportunity to read just some of the kind words out there on social media about the first couple episodes of the program, The Wrestling Stoop. It's been a very welcoming response from the wrestling fans out there.
Well, it's great. I'm really glad to hear it. So I've had some personal responses on my Facebook account, but I don't really have a way to check. I don't have the expertise to know that. I'm not really techie, but I'm glad to hear that. I mean, I think we have stories that nobody else is going to be able to tell. And I think they're interesting. I hope the folks out there will too.
Oh, I know a lot of people have been getting a kick out of all of the stories from everyone, from that last Puerto Rico, which, yes, guys, don't worry. We're going to get into the other Puerto Rico riot Bob discussed at the end of last episode. But also, you promised we would come back and tell that story of that young gentleman who tried out with Billy Robinson and company. Kind of ended awkwardly, or at least differently than I would have expected, with Bob Orton busted open and all that good stuff. But it's just been a fun time. You dropped the name Hulk Hogan at the top of the program last episode. A lot of people surprised about that one. Oh yeah, Hogan started in the 70s too. So you've got a story pretty much on everyone, and we'll talk about that as the show goes on. But first, Bob, I have a little surprise for you here this week. Last time out, we talked about your first match, that funny story with Dick Dunn being your first opponent. Now, you remembered that it took place in Fort Myers at the National Guard Armory, and you were correct. But we didn't have the date of the event for your debut match.
That's right.
Bob, I saved this to tell you on air because that bothered me that I couldn't locate it myself, the date of your first match. Something I felt you deserved to have here on your audio scrapbook, so to speak. So I went to social media, Facebook, Twitter, whatever you want to call it now, X, and I asked around, hoping maybe somebody could help us out. And I got to tell you, it took almost no time, thanks to a couple of true wrestling historians' amazing work in preserving wrestling history in their own rights. I must say thank you to Mr. Tim Dills, who almost immediately sent me the clipping, Bob, of the results from that card over on Facebook. The newspaper ad, the actual clipping. So I downloaded it. I saved it here. We have it. Of course, Mr. Tim Dills, he's put out a lot of great books covering wrestling history, so I had to thank him. But he's not to be outdone, Bob, because just a couple minutes later, over on Twitter, Al Getz, also another great wrestling historian, love his work on charting the territories. He too sends me an identical clipping that he had in his memorabilia. So both men, Tim and Al, I feel like there's a Tool Time joke there, confirming your debut. Your debut match, Bob, took place Tuesday, July 29th, 1969.
Wow. That's well, I knew it was a Tuesday because that's when Fort Myers ran. Mm-hmm. I'm glad they both had the same date. That probably corroborates it. Well, thank you, gentlemen, for sending that in. It's nice to know. Now I know when I started. So I remember everything else about it, but it's nice to know the date. Thank you again.
Yeah, and the just so I don't know if you recall this, but the feature match that night, 6-man tag team action, sees Sputnik Monroe, Sonny King, a couple of your riding buddies, and Louis Tillett over the trio of Duke Kiwamuka, Smasher Sloan, and Vincent Lopez. Now, it also reads later on in the blurb, it says also on the card. Here's the results. It says Bob Roop, the former national amateur king and 1968 Olympic team member, substituted in the opener, defeating Dick Dunn. Do you recall you being a substitution in that match?
Not a bit. Okay. Absolutely not. Okay. I don't think that. I don't remember looking at programs. I don't remember at all until I got later in my career. I certainly never saved any. Okay. I should have. I wish I had. Like Jim Cornette saved everything. Well, it's good to know. I'm sure I'll get a chance to look at those before too long.
You talked about, your nerves going into your first match ever against Dick Dunn. Dunn may be afraid you were going to pop his head like a grape, accidentally, mind you. But not only is this your first match ever, but much like many who break in, start from the bottom, so to speak, a preliminary match here, the opening match on the card. Do you remember that being the opening match of the night?
Oh, yeah. Oh, big time. Because, the audience was full of anticipation. And, later on when I became experienced, the first match is really important. A lot of times I would never have, later on in my career, if I had a rookie like myself, I never would have put him in the first match. I would have had another match with some seasoned wrestlers to go out there and give the people a real pop, and then have the second match be listed on the card or in the program as a special intro with the newcomer, and make it like it is an introductory match. And that way you can also push it a little bit too, is like the reason it's not an opener, because this is an introductory match of someone who has some little importance. Right. Even though it's their first match, they get moved up the card a little bit, and that gives it a little more prominence. It gives you an excuse to run it second. But
seems like it also might work a little bit in helping out the nerves too. Hey, there was already a match in the ring. I'm not the first guy out tonight. These fans I know I'm green as grass. I hope these fans don't realize that as well. So I'm not saying it would get rid of all the jitters, but it seems like it would help just a tiny bit with the nerves going on second.
Oh, yeah. What people are anticipating, they're impatient. They've been waiting, some of them, for an hour in their seats, waiting for the action to start. And I come out there, and I remember I went out to the ring by myself. I mean, the referee wasn't in the ring yet. I got in the ring, and I don't even remember looking at the audience or the people in the audience or if anybody said anything to me. I was so focused on, okay, tie up, get a headlock. Come on, remember your routine.
Right.
And then the referee got in there, and then after he found out that I wasn't going to, just attack Dick Dunn as soon as he hit the ring, he signaled him to come in, and then we ended up getting started. But it's still funny. Just a little aside here.
Yeah.
Female wrestler Lalani Kai.
Yes.
Was from Fort Myers, and she was in the audience and I don't know if she was there that night, but in later shows there, I met her. She was a fan, and she wanted to get into wrestling.
Wow. Okay.
And she came up and was asking me about it, but I mean, that's as far as it went. She went ahead, and I think she went up to Mula School, and then she's been working she's still working, I think. So she's been working. Yeah, she was a teenager,
she had quite a little career. She was the WWF Ladies Champion during the Rock and Wrestling era. feuding with Wendy Richter. She went on to hold the ladies tag titles up there too. Worked against the Jumping Bomb Angels in the late 80s. So Leilani got some play out there in the national, exposure.
Yeah, and I was glad to see it because she was a nice young girl, and she had these aspirations and a dream, and she got to realize them. So I thought that'd be nice to throw out because she's a colleague, and
oh, absolutely.
We know where she's. I'm not sure she's from Fort Myers. That might have been the closest match. She might have lived in another town somewhere close by. But Anyway, I thought I'd throw that out there.
Oh, very cool stuff. I don't know her personally, but I love Leilani Kai's work. So very, very cool to get another little tidbit in like that. I love that. I love these little these little side steps we take that I never know what's coming with you, Bob. And it never disappoints either. It's not like, oh, maybe you're listening to another podcast and something was getting good and then they sidetrack and you're like, I don't want to hear about that. But that's never the case here. It's always something else equally as good. So I appreciate that.
Well, thank you, Ray.
Absolutely.
Nice of you to say that. There might be people out there going, what the hell is he talking about?
Well,
get to the Puerto Rico or wherever.
Speaking of which, last week you left us with sort of a cliffhanger. Art of a good storyteller, they say, leave them wanting more. And you left me wanting more, and many of us all wanting more as based on some of the feedback I've gotten. So you told one Puerto Rico story involving Dale Lewis, the Missouri Mauler, a few others, but you left the book open when you mentioned you had another story that took place down there in Puerto Rico featuring a real motley crew of talent. I don't know if you want to run back over the names here, refresh everybody before you get into the story here this week.
Well, I seem to recall telling a story about the end result of the episode I'm going to flesh out, now, was when we were all in the dressing room. There was a riot going out in the building, and all the cops were in the dressing room.
Yes.
It was like 40 cops are in the dressing room. I asked, well, why aren't they out there taking care of getting the people out of the building so we can leave? And they said, well, they're all hiding in here too. That's the story I'm telling about. And, I thought about calling it. There was a movie a while back called The Perfect Storm. And this night we're talking about was the perfect riot because all the ingredients that went into it created what happened, which was it was just guaranteed to be a riot. One of them was that Jim Barnett had come back from Australia and had gotten involved. I'm not sure. I'm going to try to find this out. There might be historians out there or people for some other reason that are in the know exactly how Barnett he traded or sold part of his interest in, or all of his interest in Australia to get a piece of either Florida or Georgia or both. And he was back in the States and he was running things. He was telling us what to do from the Florida office in Puerto Rico. And Johnny Weaver had come in and to be the booker, and he's never booked in Florida before. Mm-hmm. Neither one of these guys knew a thing about Puerto Rico. So I'd already worked in the office by this time as an assistant booker, but I'd worked in Puerto Rico a bunch of times, and I'd already that Dale Lewis thing had happened years earlier. So Toro Tanaka was going against Jose Lothario in the match, and they were going to do a hot finish where he was going to screw him out of the belt. He was going to cheat him and take the title. And what they wanted to do, what the instructions they sent, were for me and Dick Slater to go down to the ring when the match was over and help Tanaka get out of there. And I told him, I doubt very seriously if we would even make it to the ring if we tried to do that. What these fans are going to assume that we're doing is we're coming down there to help Tanaka.
Right.
Kill Lothario or hurt Lothario.
Out permanently.
We're never going to make it down there. And they also said, and you guys stay in your wrestling clothes. I said, you're out of your mind. I said, if we're standing out here, we've already wrestled. Now, this was the main event we're talking about. We'd already worked our matches. So if we stay out there in our wrestling clothes, geez, I wonder why we're staying there in our wrestling clothes and not getting dressed and, back in our civilian clothes. What could we possibly be thinking? Is it possible we're going to go run down the ring and get involved? I mean, that's what the fans are going to assume.
Sure.
So I told them, hell no, we're not going to leave her. I said, I don't particularly feel like running down there and getting messed up, but I'm not going to leave my wrestling clothes on. We're going to put our civvies on. So we're standing out there watching the finale of this match. It was in a big building. It had a balcony. It was convention building of some kind, but it was enormous. It probably seat 25,000 and maybe 15, but it was big. It wasn't full, but there was a few thousand people there. So we're standing out there, which is dangerous, because there were no cops around us. They weren't going to hang around with us. They were over where they weren't being threatened. So Slater and I are standing out there, and there's guys walking behind us with knives in their hands. So Slater's standing facing backwards, and I'm standing facing forward, and we're both our heads on a swivel, just to make sure. I had the Florida heavyweight belt. Mm-hmm. I brought it up there with me as a weapon.
Wow. Okay.
I had it swing up from my hand, and I let them know, come at me with that knife, you're going to eat this belt. So anyway, they did the finish, and I told Weaver, I said, look, we're not going down there. We'll wait, and if there's trouble, then we'll go down there and we'll try to open the aisle. If the aisle fills up where he can't get out, I said, make sure, and I told Tanaka myself, he's a great guy, I really liked him. Mm-hmm. But I told him, I said, man, whatever you do not run. If you get in a problem, give me the high sign. We can be there in about 5 seconds.
Right.
So he's on his way back. He did foul Lothario somehow, and he got out of there. He's about halfway up the aisle. He's by the part where all the people were sitting, and the last 7 or 8 rows of the chairs were empty. But there was a guy that picked up the folding chairs. There were sections of like 3 in a row mm-hmm. that were together, like they were a set. And there was a guy that picked up he couldn't pick it up. What he did is he tipped it and he just knocked it over. And Tanaka happened to be looking the other way when the chairs went over. He heard this horrible screeching noise just a few feet away, and without even looking to see what it was, he took off like a shot. Wow. And I'm talking about he set a world record. He got by us on his way back to the dressing room. Slater and I standing there, he got by us and in like 2 seconds was in the dressing room. Meanwhile, the guy that pushed the chairs over, he sees him run, so he takes off after him, and everybody else starts coming too. There was no riot until then. As soon as Tanaka took off, and I'm not blaming him, they shouldn't even done that finish. But anyway, here they come. If Slater and I, in order to get back in the dressing room safely, we're going to have to run. I don't want to run because you have to run with your back turned, and there might be somebody faster than me with a knife in their hand. So we did. That guy that threw the chairs was leading the charge. He was about 25, 30 feet in front of everybody. The rest of the people were starting to come. When he went by Slater hit him with a right cross and turned the guy completely around.
I believe.
And when I was about 4 feet along the route, and there was a great big concrete cylinder there, and I just steered the guy. He had turned completely around. Mm-hmm. It was running backwards, and I just steered him, so he ran into that concrete abutment.
Oh, man.
And down he went, and that stopped everything. And then Slater and I walked, keeping our eyes open, our heads on a swivel. We walked into the dressing room, and that's where we stayed for, I think it took 2 hours to get those people out of the building.
Wow.
Oh, believe me, it's dangerous as it could be. There's no way of knowing. You never know. There's people that might even bring weapons, like pistols or knives, or certainly knives, but something with bullets in it. So that didn't have to happen at all. But you have people that are running a show that don't know what they're doing, and you're trying to tell them, and they think, well, you're not the booker, Johnny Weaver, I'm the booker, I'm the one, that's what I want to do. And I said, well, he wasn't there. Barnett and Weaver weren't there.
Right.
We got these instructions from over the telephone, mm-hmm. and I was running at night. I said, man, you guys, you really don't want to do this down here, and neither one of them, I don't know if any of them have ever been there for a match. So anyway, yeah, it was, we were very lucky that I felt bad for that poor fan, but
right.
In a way he brought it on himself. I hope he didn't have any, permanent damage, but it was pretty exciting. And again, the cops, I guess the people were aroused to the point the cops didn't want to go out there and have anything to do with them.
Well, cops are just people too. I can't really blame them when you got a riot on your hands like that. If you didn't come properly equipped or certainly outnumbered,
Well, the judicial system down there, I don't want to segue too far away from it.
No,
We're through. We're not through completely with Puerto Rico because we're going to talk along the line somewhere. We're going to talk about Bruiser Brody and what happened to him down there.
Right.
We're not going to do that tonight, but it deserves a lot more time than just mentioning it. But part of the judicial system is set up is that if you're an off-island person, you've got a couple strikes against you already in terms of getting a fair shake. That's I don't like it, but I understand it. I mean, at the same time, if a Puerto Rican citizen was in Wichita Falls and got in trouble, they might have prejudice against them when they went to court, just from not being, like a white American. Maybe if they don't speak English or whatever. So anyway, you got any more questions about Puerto Rico?
No, well, I just got one question really quickly about this specific incident. You may not even recall, but I'm just curious. What caused this riot outside of them seeing Toru Tanaka make that dash? You told us last time out, Sam Steamboat gave you a very encouraging word of advice when it comes to fans. Do you remember what that was, what you told me last time around?
Yeah, never run.
Never run. That's what Dale Lewis did, started a riot number one that you were discussing, and that's apparently what Toru Tanaka did. It's hard picturing Toru Tanaka run. No offense, Tanaka fans. He's a big guy, but man, he was like a tank. It's hard to envision him physically running, but also hard to envision him being, like, oh my God, I got to get out of here. He just always came off as that tough guy character. And I'm not saying he's not a tough guy. He wasn't a tough guy. It's just, I get it, man. I might have ran myself. You guys, you and Dickie Slater, you didn't run. You kind of tried to not incite it even further by, they're all scared of us.
Yeah. And running was gonna, what happened is when the guy hit the pillar and went down, he was out, and the rest of them stopped.
Right. Okay.
So Slater, and so for Slater and me to run, I'd just get him started again.
Right.
So we just walked casually. I mean, I wouldn't flip anybody a bird or anything. We just walked as if, I was still swinging that belt around, or at least swinging it at the end of my hand, so they knew I had a weapon. But, we just walked to the dressing room. I mean, we didn't just saunter. We weren't taking a walk in the park, but we got there pretty quickly. But we weren't running, right. And I think Tanaka himself intimidated him. This guy's a big, got a 22-inch neck, and he's a great big, solid, nasty-looking guy. Right. Knows all, his rep is knowing all karate and all these martial arts, and he looks the part. I think people were scared, individually were scared of him. And see, that's the deal. If you keep people as individuals, you don't get a riot. When you run, you trigger an impulse in people that brings them together. You create a common denominator. Right. Yes, the mob mentality. As long as you don't want to do anything to create that kind of group mentality against what you're doing. How about a Terry Funk story on that very subject?
Sure.
In
always time for a Terry Funk story.
Well, for you out there, you kind listener, Ray and I have planned what we're going to talk about, but we're agreed that spontaneity sometimes is nice, and these stories come up. And even though we hadn't even planned on it, we were going to talk about Terry Funk, but here's the way to talk about Terry that fits into what we're talking about with the mob mentality, anti-riot.
Okay.
Dory Jr. was working with Jack Briscoe in Jacksonville, and they had these series of great matches just in all over Florida, Miami, Tampa, Jacksonville, and Orlando. A lot of times they went an hour. They went an hour to this time limit, and great. The matches weren't running around. They weren't doing a lot of hit the ropes and backdrops and hip throws and all that. A lot of wrestling, being in a hold. Usually ended up at near the end. That Jack would have, with like at 59 minutes, Jack would have Dory Jr. in the figure four, his finish hold.
Right.
And the first couple of times he did it, they were close enough to the ropes that Dory, after looking like he was going to give up, would just manage to barely grab the rope, and the referee would have to break the hold, and that would save Dory, and the time would run out. This time they worked it out where when Jack got the hold on him, they were out in the middle of the ring, And so there was like 2 minutes left. So it looked like Dory was going to have to give up. Well, Terry had worked earlier. And of course, this was the main event. The Funk and Briscoe was the main event, the last match. Terry runs down there, races down there from the back, gets up on the turnbuckle. And now Jack's got the figure four on Dory, and Jack's kind of leaned back. He's got his foot. He's kind of leaned back. Terry jumps off the top rope, or the turnbuckle, the metal pole. He's got one foot on the ropes and the other foot on the pole. Yeah. He jumps off and drops a knee across Jack's throat. It looked like it killed him. It looked like his head should pop off. Wow. When I'm watching from the stage, and Terry, for some reason, I thought, why in the heck didn't he tell about 4 or 5 of us to be out here to help him, to help him get back here? How's he going to get back? Because when he did that, all the people sitting on the aisles ran out of their seats and formed up around the ring. And I'm thinking, how's Terry? Now, Dory has been in that leg lock for like 2 minutes before Terry got there. He's not going to be able to sprint out of there. Terry's going to have to help him out of there unless you want to expose the business that he's not really hurt at all. So he's got to at least pretend he's hurt. So how are they going to do that without getting killed? So I'm watching. I'm thinking, okay. I mean, I believe me, my hair was standing on end because I'm going to have to go down, and I'm ready to do it. But still, it looked like really risky business. So Terry got Dory fairly close to the corner where they were going to be getting out, the heel entry corner and exit corner. They came down different aisles. So and he went to the other side of the ring, and I didn't have a clue what he was going to do. Now, around the ring is surrounded by people, not quite back to the front row of seats, but the people around the ring are about 6 feet thick, all the way around it on both sides. And they're screaming and yelling and hitting the mat, and they're, come on, get out of here, Terry, we're going to kill you. He gets on the far end of the ring, and he comes running across the ring. He jumps up, he puts his hand on the top of that turnbuckle that he just put his foot on to jump on Jack's neck, and he leaped off the mat surface over the top rope right into the middle of the people that were waiting at the end of the stairs down there. And they all scattered. They scattered like quail having a big hunting dog run right in the middle of them. And they stayed scattered. Terry got Dory out of there. I got down there by that time. And what he did, by doing that, he put people back into a mob, from a mob mentality back into, I better watch my own hide here. This guy's going to kill me. Or he's going to land on me, or, right. And people were running and scattering and created a big aisle there. And, and also it made Terry look like he was fearless. Sure. He wasn't worried. He wasn't worried about all of them. And people started thinking about their own health. And by that time we had myself and a few of the cops were down there. And so we got out there without any problem. Neither one of them got hurt. And Terry, that was no big deal. That was just a trick of the trade.
Just another night for Terry Funk.
Well, it was a trick of the trade. I didn't know it. I'd never seen anything else. I'd never seen anybody else do anything like that. But it worked. It was great.
Right.
So yeah, that mob mentality, boy, you need to avoid that if you can. If you're a wrestler, you don't want. I mean, it's okay if they're all in claim. You put a guy over so great that they're all one mind and thinking he's the greatest wrestler in the world, but not when it's wanting to kill the heel. You certainly don't want them of one mind about that.
Well, yeah, it was a very intriguing story. Certainly didn't disappoint. I was going to ask you, we were talking earlier a little bit about maybe some of the names we'd go over here this week, and, Terry was one of them. And, I asked you if you had any good Terry stories. I'm sure you did, but I asked you, maybe we share a Terry story or two since, he recently passed away, sadly. One of the greatest of all time to ever do it in the ring and outside of the ring is, man, just double tough, man. Terry Funk, and what a great story. Basically trying to dive out onto the fans, just nuttier than a pet coon is what Jim Ross would have probably said.
Yeah. Well, shall we tell another one?
Well, that would be, I was just going to ask you, do you have another one in mind?
Well, yeah, the one I originally had thought about telling, again, that Terry story came up because of the mob mentality thing. But when I was working within the first 18 months of being in the business, I went out to Amarillo it was the first territory I went out to from Florida after I got started. I mean, I went to Japan for 5 weeks, 7 weeks, and I went to Australia for a few weeks, but it was the first other territory I went out. Eddie Graham asked me to go out, do him a favor, to go out there and work for the Funks for 6 months. So because Eddie got me started and all that, I said, okay. And, I didn't have any problem with doing it, except once I got there, it was ungodly trips. I mean, that leads right into the story. We were working on Sunday. We worked 7 days a week. On Sunday, we worked in Albuquerque. And even though the show was in the evening, the TV show played in the morning. And it played, they put it on the air. And we actually took the TV tape. We had to be down there by 11 o'clock in the morning. Well, it's a 300-mile trip from Amarillo. So you had to leave at like 5 o'clock in the morning to make sure to get down there on time. Mm-hmm. And you'd do you'd go to the TV station. And instead of having taped interviews, they would play the wrestling show. And then during the breaks on the wrestling show, while the tape was running through for the 2-minute place that they would normally insert interviews, we did the interviews there live with the promoter from Albuquerque.
Wow. Okay.
So after Albuquerque, if you were booked in El Paso, everybody was booked in El Paso the next day on Monday. So we'd stay over in Albuquerque and then drive to El Paso the next day, which was about 270 miles from Albuquerque. And then if you were booked in Odessa, Texas, mm-hmm. which was another 180 miles, you could drive there after El Paso if you wanted to, or you could stay over in El Paso and drive there the next day. However, if you were booked in Abilene on Monday, you had to go back to Amarillo. Well, from El Paso to Amarillo is 470 miles.
Damn.
So I was riding with Terry. We had driven from Albuquerque to El Paso that afternoon. So 270 miles in the car, about 4 hours, I guess. Terry did burn up the roads. So now we're going back to Amarillo, and Buck Robley, a wrestler, well, he had an accident where he was out visiting Mother Nature right on the road, and a car ran over it or hit him and broke his leg and crippled him where he could never wrestle again, but he became one of the top managers, and he was a guy that was really sharp with the business and everything. So, he did well for himself. He made money in the business, even though he didn't do much in the ring. But Buck was there, and Terry and I was there. I had to go back. Terry and Buck and I were all in Abilene, so we had to go back to Amarillo. I had I think a fifth of rum. You could buy rum down there real cheap in El Paso or Tijuana. They each had a case of beer, I think. So, 400, we got even if Terry going 85, 90 miles an hour, we've got a 6 hour trip, 5-6 hour trip. So, I'm still pretty green. I mean, the guys are friendly. I would learn to work well enough that nobody really ever treated me like a rookie. I mean, I was older. I'd been in the service. I wasn't like some young kid. I had established myself in other things before I, got in the business. So mm-hmm. I don't know whether that created respect or whatever, but I got ribbed, but I didn't get picked on or denigrated. I wasn't put down. Nobody tried to humiliate me. So, but anyway, Terry and Buck are having a who's the most rangy contest. They're drinking beer and they're talking about what they did and all these things and who did the rangiest thing. So Terry's, like I said, Terry's driving. And Buck said something about, well, you're kind of a puss, with the way you drive here. And so the next overpass we came to, which we were on a state highway, no gas stations, no homes. You could see spreads like ranches or something way in the distance on the side of the road, but there wasn't even any mailbox out by the side of the state road for hundreds of miles. I'm talking about it was dark, no lights, no street lights, nothing. If the moon was behind the cloud, you were going through pitch dark. So, I mean, again, we're talking about 3 or 4 hours without even seeing any lights anywhere except in the sky. So we come to one of these little arroyo type passes that go over there's a road that goes over the road. And Terry went up one side at about 50 miles an hour, did like a a turn onto the road, like the bridge over the road, and went back down the other side and back onto the state road. And he was sliding in dirt all the way up and all the way back down, and then back on the road. And I scared the heck out of me, I'm going,
well, it'll wake you up.
Oh, scared that. I didn't know he was going to do it. He didn't say, watch out. All of a sudden, the car just takes off the road, is running up the side of this hill, tires screeching, bumping up and down, bottles flying everywhere, and glass tinkling. I thought, so when he got back on the road, it was quiet. I didn't say anything, but Terry's waiting for Buck to say something. Buck says, is that all you got?
Oh, boy.
That's all you got, man. He said, you are tame, aren't you? Well, what happened was, in doing that, Terry tore up one of his tires. So now, like I told you just a minute ago, we're out in the middle of nowhere. And, there's no gas stations. There's no houses on the road.
Pitch black, too.
There were no cell phones yet. This is back in 1970. No cell phones. And all of a sudden, you can hear this tire. It's losing, pieces of the tire coming off. You can hear them. It's flapping and everything. So that lasts we're about 70 miles from where we know there's a gas station. It's a little town called Hereford, which is about 30, 40 miles outside of Amarillo on our side, the side we're approaching from. And we get there, we can get some gas and all that. Well, the tire went flat about a mile from Hereford. And by the time we got to Hereford, all the rubber Terry didn't slow down. We're still going 60 miles an hour. By the time we got to Hereford, all the rubber had come off. It was on the rim. So the rim is cutting into the road. There's a shower of sparks behind a car that's at least 8 feet high. It's above the rear of the car. This road is being, Terry's eating up a big divot. The divot in the road was there I saw it for the next 3 months. Every time I went by there, it was about four inches deep.
Hey, I know how that got there.
Yeah, it's about 3 inches wide. And here's the deal. We went by, there was a cop, the town cop was waiting. He was parked. I didn't see him till his lights went on. As we went by, this car pulls up behind us, and the siren, the lights on and the sirens. And Terry got in the middle of the road where the guy couldn't pass him and couldn't block him, the cop. And meanwhile, I'm thinking, oh, we're going to jail going to prison on this one. And finally, the gas station's about another half mile. And Terry pulls in there, pulls up by the gas pump. Now, he and Buck have got at least 14 to 20 bottles each of empties, beer bottles, down in the front wheel, the leg,
right,
where their legs go. Terry's got on a pair of shorts that's unbuckled the belt. Unbuckled. That's all he's got on. No shoes, which is illegal. You're supposed to have shoes on when you drive. He might have had flip-flops or something in the car, but he didn't care. So he opens the door and he gets out. Like I said, he's got on just these shorts, no underwear. When he gets out, his pants fall down around his knees. So he's standing there with his junk hanging out, looking back, and the cop pulls him behind us. And this cop is a local guy in this town, and I find out later, they know each other real well. Terry's been doing this for like 10 years, this kind of crap. But I didn't know that at the time. I'm thinking, all I see is a cop. If it's me driving, I know I'm going to jail for at least tonight, maybe for a week or two, where I can even get out.
Right.
But Terry gets out. We got all these beer bottles on the floor. A couple bottles fell out. When he got out, bottles fell out.
Sure.
Robley got out. 4 or 5 fell out of his side, too. And I thought, oh, God, we're definitely going to jail on this one. And somehow he talked his way. I left something out. Not only did he not have a license with him, his license has actually been suspended.
Oh, not surprising at this point in the story.
But here's the deal. Think about it. He's Terry Funk, and Dory Funk Sr.
Right.
And Terry Jr. owned Amarillo in a way. The way that Terry and Dory Sr., the way they advertised wrestling in town when they first started, you know how they did it?
No.
They went out to bar. Did you hear the story?
No, I don't believe so.
They went out to bars, and they were drinking, and they wait for somebody to say something, about wrestling.
Mm-hmm.
They had their TV show going.
Right.
They go out to bars on Saturday night, like 11:30, 12 o'clock, when people were drunk, and they did, if they couldn't get in, couldn't have a fight come to them, they'd go to the fight, they'd find a fight, and they got arrested, I don't know, every once or twice a month for a year or two, but they always got out. But what they did with doing that is people said, well, I don't know about wrestling, but those two guys are real. Those two guys are tough.
They fought basically everybody in the city.
Well, they had more publicity.
Sure. And I don't know if I've heard that story about the Funks doing that, but I have heard that being done. It's been done in Memphis or Nashville and things like that at different times. So no, that's really cool. That's what they did to get going there. But I'm trying to picture Terry Funk driving like that with the sparks flying, pulling into the gas station, blocking the police officer from passing him or getting around him, getting out of the car with the beer cans falling out, which is fairly dangerous in itself. I mean, they could have got stuck underneath the brakes, I guess, but at least we know Terry Funk's not a litter bug, right? He kept everything in the car. So
well, what had happened? He lived in a little place called Arroyo, which is, I think, like a little canal through the mesquite, the dirt out there. He lived in a little town called Arroyo that was only a couple of miles from Hereford. So he would go through Hereford about 90 miles an hour. By the time the cops got after him, he would be a mile ahead. Well, he would go around the corner. He'd duck down the road to Arroyo, to his home, and the cops wouldn't see him. He'd pull into his driveway and in the garage. The cops wouldn't see his car. They'd go on by. He got away with it for years. And then I heard this story. I wasn't there at the time. He got away with it for years. And one night they smartened up. After they smartened up, when he went through town at 90, they had the road blocked. The road into Arroyo was blocked. So Terry got out of his car. He got out and he went around his car kicking in the fenders and got up on the hood and jumped up and down. He got up on the top of the car on the roof and jumped up and down. He's cussing the car. You filthy car! You should let me down. You weren't going fast enough. You gave him time to get the roadblock.
Get the roadblock off.
Yeah. He destroyed his car, and the cops were so amused that they didn't charge him with. Oh my God! They could have charged
that Terry Funk charm. My God.
Yeah. He was. You know what? He was crazy, but in a way that you were kind of in on the joke with him.
Right.
He wasn't harming people. He wasn't hurt.
Yeah.
So what a character though. A very lovable guy. Yeah.
So what happened at the gas station? The cop lets you go, but you guys can't keep riding. Did you keep rolling down the street in that car?
Well, we had to get the tire. We had to get a new tire, and Terry did something. I don't know whether the cop ended up taking off. I couldn't. I mean, I sobered up real quick. I think, man,
sure.
I really don't need to be in jail. Here, late,
that's just one road story.
Yeah, 4 o'clock in the morning on Monday morning. I'm lucky if I can get home. We got to leave about 11 o'clock to go to Abilene, to get there in time. Oh my God, I don't want to be in jail all night. There won't be any sleep. But that was Terry.
Great stories.
I've got some more that we'll talk about down the line.
I can't wait. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I almost feel bad now because I was going to ask you, poor Dory now, he has to follow this because I was going to ask you at the time you broke in back there in 69, Dory Funk Jr. was the world heavyweight champion of the NWA. Right. And, I was going to start off by maybe talking about Dory and then segueing into Terry, but we've already, let the cat out of the bag now. We've discussed Terry, so I kind of feel bad making Dory follow that. But really my only question was, as you broke in, and Dory Funk Jr. was your world champion of the NWA, if you will. I was just curious, the first time you saw him in the ring, did you, or any kind of, maybe not stories you may have of meeting with Dory and things, maybe that wasn't, somebody you hung around with, but just curious, like your take of Dory, the wrestler, and also Dory being the world champion.
Well, Terry and Dory were brothers, but you would never know it if you put them in a room and with 4 or 5 other people that look more like Terry and asked who were brothers. Nobody would have picked him and Dory. They didn't look anything alike, and their temperaments are completely different too. Dory was, I heard some stories about Dory Jr. partying a little, but not many. And when he was champion, he didn't.
Okay.
He wasn't. Ric Flair is champion, and Ric Flair was out every night after the matches and going to bars and laying a couple hundreds on the bar and saying asking him to mix up a big whole punch bowl full of vodka, Stoli vodka for everybody in the bar. And he was Mr. Party guy. Dory Jr. was completely different. He was more of a private person, I think. I never ever had an intimate conversation with him. Well, I've never rode in a car with him.
Okay.
So I don't know him as well. I had the pleasure of working with him. I worked a title match with him in Amarillo. But when he was, of course, he was a champion. But I don't remember the match. It must have been. Oh, if I was working with him, I mean, that guy was a genius.
Okay.
The match is going to be good. It doesn't matter who you are. He could work with a guy in a wheelchair and have a great match. As far as he's the opposite of the Wild Man.
Right.
He and Terry would be good as Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde.
That would be a good one.
Yeah. But Dory and Dory Senior was more Terry-ish than he was Junior.
Right. Sounded like it based on those bar stories you were telling.
Well, they all were educated. Senior graduated from, I think, Indiana, and wrestled there. And I think Dory and Terry both went to West Texas, I believe.
Texas, right.
A lot of the boys out there did. So, they were educated guys. I mean, they weren't just rough guys with no brains.
Well, it sounds like Dory took working with the world title fairly seriously. He was going to be, on the ball, and he, by everybody's account, there's a great match out there. I don't have the date off the top of my head, but I saw it a long time ago, and it's not really always my cup of tea to watch the old 60-minute, the time limit draws to Broadways, unless it's, Flair and Steamboat had a really great one in the late 80s, 89 or whatever, and then there's been some other great ones as well over time, but when you go back to that era, they can tend to be a little boring sometimes.
Yes.
But they had a matchup, Dory and Jack Briscoe did. If you just really appreciate wrestling, it was in All Japan, and I don't remember the date, but I've seen it a few times, the matchup. I just sat there for the entire hour, just mesmerized by their counters, the wrestling. It was just a really great match. You were talking about those two going at it for an hour. I've seen it, and it was a really good match. So seeing Dory as world champion versus Dory maybe later on down the road, maybe not everybody's cup of tea, trying to work him into the WWF in the mid '80s as Hoss Funk, if you will. But going back in there, I was just curious how he was. It sounds like he took it very seriously. Like Bruno, there's stories always of Bruno Sammartino when he was world champion in the WWF. He always took it very seriously to the point where he wouldn't even drink wine if he was out publicly eating dinner in a restaurant because he didn't want children to see him drinking alcohol. So it's just very interesting how some of these guys took things back then.
I guess you're talking about an element of kayfabe, right? And where kayfabe was like ixnay on letting anybody know what's really going on here.
Sure.
And protecting the business, and that was always a major factor forever until 1989, when a WWF went on A&E, I believe it was, and you had top wrestler in the world, Hulk Hogan, telling everybody that wrestling wasn't real; it was just a sports entertainment. And that, so you had the major promoter in the world was telling the world that no, what we're doing isn't real. It's sports entertainment. And of course, you have to extrapolate that. You have to say, well, then if it's not now, then it never was it? So all those guys at all those years, now the guys that spent their whole career kayfabing and not even telling their families that it wasn't real.
Right.
Imagine what those guys had to say to their wives and children. Just imagine.
Yeah. I am so far removed from that era now that I totally forget that some of those guys did do that. They worked their family with their wives. It's just insane.
Yeah.
Think that.
Yeah. They go home and lay on the couch for a week like they're hurt when they weren't. But they I don't understand it. I mean, but older generations. It depends on what your relationship with your wife would be. I would never want to do that. It's a living lie. You're lying to your person you're supposed to love. If you can't trust them, I mean, you can't trust them.
Right.
Yeah. I remember another little off the side. I remember an interview David Schultz did. It was before or around the time he slapped the
John Stossel.
Yeah, Stossel. They did an interview where they came to his house, and
oh yeah, his
you
house,
remember the one?
Unquote, yeah, his log cabin house. Absolutely.
Yeah, and they're talking to him and everything, and he's rough and gruff, and the mad, the real butthead. I mean,
yeah.
Well, he has one of his kids there, one of his sons.
They were actors. They were actors, I believe.
Oh, were they?
Yeah.
Oh, were they?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that. Well,
story, yeah.
Oh, well, that. Okay, I got a whole new light on it, because the kid when Schultz is saying all this horrible stuff,
right?
The kid's just kind of grinning at him, and Schultz says, "What are you grinning at?" And the kid's face just crumpled. It looked like he was terrified. And I thought, that it was Schultz's real kid, and he knew Daddy wasn't really hurt,
right?
So he wasn't selling it. So Schultz realized he wasn't selling it. And I hated the guy's guts. I thought, what a jerk.
Well,
but
I think there's some truth to that, though, because I'm not saying the kid knew Dave, but if I remember the story correctly, the kid was smiling, and Schultz did do that to keep him from smiling, because he was an actor, but it wasn't like they pulled him out of Hollywood or anything, right? He was an actor kid, and he was given, some short direction, probably to sit here. I mean, it was 1984 WWF, maybe early 85, whatever. So it wasn't like Vince was like perfect yet, with the production and things. So I'm sure there was probably a little bit of realism in there. Boy, I'll smack your ear off,
Yeah. Let me tell you this. It got heat. I didn't know Schultz at all. I'd met him, I think, but I was never even had a beer with him or anything in my career, and never did. But yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong. The guy, he's whatever he does is, whatever people do, they're the ones that pay for it in most cases, so I'm fine with it. But that got heat with me, because I had young kids at the time. When I saw that, I thought, what a jerk. If that is really, now finding out it's not his kid, it's actually brilliant, because he did get some serious heat.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I thought anybody wouldn't hate the guy. Anybody wouldn't hate someone who was like that to his own kid. My God.
No, that was a great segment. He even shot off like a rifle in his own house or whatever. Vince McMahon screams at him and they end the segment. So that was just, for the time, man, when you have no prototype to those things in wrestling, you're right. That was pretty brilliant segment.
Yeah, it was. It was brilliant. I thought it was great.
Then he goes and slaps Stossel, and he doesn't have a job.
Yeah, that was. Vince told me they wanted him to stick up for the business, I think, and I don't know how much more you could stick up for it. Well, that's not really great, smacking a guy like half your size.
No, you gotta be wise. I mean, that's big business, man. 2020.
Well, yeah, and I mean, hitting anybody half your size, I don't care if it's a man, a woman, whatever, especially, you're a bully. It's not. You could spit in his face or, whatever, threaten him, grab him by the lapels and shake him.
Sure.
But slap the guy, no.
I think Stossel got a nice little settlement out of that, so maybe he's not complaining.
Well, let me think. Would I want a quarter of $1,000,000 to get slapped on TV in front of the whole world? Let me think. Nope, I don't think so. Maybe a lot of people would. I wouldn't. Sorry.
I'd take it. I'm not ashamed, man. I'll take the money.
I'll take it with one codicil. As soon as the camera goes off, no holds barred.
There you go.
Yeah.
There you go. That's fair.
Yeah.
Whatever happens. Well, I mean, before we get too far into the show, I thought maybe we go back a little bit and talk a little bit more about the early part of your career here this week, if you're down for it.
Of course.
Oh, they're very good. So last week we talked about your very first match, Dick Dunn. We now know July 29th, 1969. So let's go back to the beginning of your career once more as we continue to tell the Bob Roop story, guys. And I didn't think to ask this last week, but How was Bob Roop, the wrestling character, if you will, for lack of a better term, how were you presented? I know Eddie Graham was touting your Olympic credentials for both your sake and his. So do you start off as an all-American babyface here? Is that what they, for lack of a better term? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And what they did for a while, I hated it. They said I was a Olympic champion. And there's nothing.
There's no
worse.
Google back then, Bob. No Google.
No, but there's nothing worse. Any amateur wrestlers watching that would know that was a lie. And there's nothing worse you can do is to claim titles that you didn't take. I mean,
because they're saying it, not you, but it comes back on you, it reflects on you. I get you.
Yeah. So you lose your credibility for what you did do. I mean, you making an Olympic team is fairly credible. The fact that. But you claim you won a gold medal too. Well, it taints the whole thing. So I didn't like that part. What are you going to do? They're run the promotion. I worked for them. All I could do was, which I did a few times, is just quit.
It's wrestling. Everything's a gimmick. You could have been an Olympic gold medalist, Bob, and never even been in the Olympics as far as wrestling goes.
That's true. That's true.
Do you remember who was booking the territory when you first started down there in '69?
Yeah, it was Louis Tillett.
Tillett, okay. I know he had booked off and on for Florida and maybe a few other places. Maybe Alabama? Does that sound right? Tillett had booked a few places down south.
I'm not sure about any place but Florida. Well, he booked Pensacola for a while.
Okay. That's right. Gulf Coast. Yeah, Gulf Coast. There
Yeah. He was a decent booker. Eddie Graham was still involved. I think they kicked ideas around. Eddie had a lot of great ideas and finishes from his experience, and I think they worked out stuff together. But Louis would go to the shows and run the shows, and he was fine.
Okay. So as I was sorting through your early opponents, specifically a few names that you were basically married to in the ring for most of the early months here in the business for your career, I noticed a little pattern for the most part. You were put in there, and likely not by accident, I would think, with a lot of veterans. I mean, longtime veterans that were already beyond their prime in the ring, well beyond their prime, some of them. Do you think this was done because the grizzled vets, you might learn something from them, or was it just there were names that were expendable on the roster that they could put you over? Or maybe both situations?
That latter one, the both. I think the fact that they, like Hans Mortier, for example,
sure.
He had been fairly good. I mean, one time he was Florida heavyweight champion, so he had apparently had some stature in the territory at one time. And I know even though they didn't have cable, he had been big up in New York, where the WWF operated. I think it was WWW back then, but McMahon Sr., he had a feud with Bruno Sammartino up there. But when I met him, or when I worked with him, I don't remember him getting any great, like, coming to the ring. He didn't get people screaming at him like he had a lot of heat, that people hated him or whatever. He looked about 60. I mean, his body looked great.
Yeah.
But his face, he was obviously he looks older than I do now, to me anyway. And I also don't remember the matches I saw. I was looking on some background stuff on wrestling records, and I worked with him a few times, but I don't remember any of the matches, which means that they must have gone okay. So that answers your one leg of your question about putting somebody in there who could lead me around and make me look good. I mean, where I didn't look like I just wasn't stumbling, not having a clue about what to do. That's one thing. And then the fact that they had a little stature too, that when I beat them, that meant something. But I noticed that Mortier retired just a few years after that, like 4 or 5 years later.
Somewhere around 73, I think.
Yeah, so he was in the waning part of his career. So I don't know. Maybe he was living in Florida because he liked it there or whatever. I'm not sure, but I know he wasn't working. I don't think he was working every day. But he was one of them.
Yeah, I think by the time you got in the ring with him, he'd already been in the business 20 plus years. And then I think he also used about 20 plus aliases from some of the research I did, but none more famous than Hans Mortier. He started back in the mid 1940s. So here he is all the way in 1969 working with a very young rookie Bob Roop. So he was definitely on my list. And I was just curious, if you had any memories of getting in there with him. I didn't know if there was some of these guys, I would imagine, these guys heading off to retirement here fairly soon, some of them are probably a little grumpy that they have to say goodbye to the business. So I'm just curious, along the way, if I drop any names that you remember they weren't too pleasant to work with because they knew that, their time, the sun was setting on their career, so to speak. So, but Hans Mortier definitely was on my list here. Also, early on, you worked a couple other names here. One by the name of Eduardo Perez. He was a 20-year veteran. Worked just about everywhere from what I could tell, especially in the southeastern territories. He seems to slow down throughout the 1970s, but he is on the list. I didn't know if you had any memories of him.
Again, the matches must have been okay because I don't even remember working with him. But Eduardo Eddie was a great guy. He had great stories. He had a charming accent. He was an outrageous character in public around people. People really liked him. The only thing I remember about him that stands out is he had to work with the wrestling bear one time, and the bear busted him open. So
hard way.
Yeah. He probably headbutted him with that mask that other mask they put on. You had to watch that. That bear would headbutt you with that thing, and it was hard. It was hard leather, so it wouldn't come apart. So yeah, you had to be careful. Yeah, other guys you mentioned in a text that we were sending back and forth. Cisco Gamaldo and
Smasher Sloan was
Smasher Sloan. Yeah,
Smasher Sloan. See, he had already probably worked about 15 years by this point, but he was also in and out of New York, Washington, the WWF throughout most of the 1960s. So he had a lot of exposure up there in Vince Sr.'s territory by the time he came back down to Florida, and you got in the ring with him. But I think you told me off air at one point, I think you said you had a Smasher Sloan story, maybe?
Yeah, he was, I worked, again, I don't remember the matches, so they must have gone okay. But he asked me and Jack Briscoe to go scuba diving with him at a sinkhole, a place called Blue Grotto. And it was I think a limestone quarry, probably maybe 50 yards across where we were going. I thought we were going down into the quarry itself, which is, is all there's sunlight above. It's, it's open sky above.
Right.
But what he had in mind was there was a shaft at one side of this thing that angled at about 45 degrees away from it. It was at the very edge of the big hole that had been created by them taking whatever gravel, limestone, whatever it was they took out of there.
Right.
And the shaft went down about 100 feet, and it went at a 45-degree angle. So by the time you got to the bottom, you were about 25 feet away from the edge of that hole. And above you is like many, many thousands of tons of rock and dirt and trees and all that. And I'm claustrophobic. So we got out there. They had one of those little cable bridge types like you see in the Raiders of the Lost Ark going across, the ravines and all that.
Right. Oh,
and
yeah.
So we carried our tanks and walked out there. Jack pulled the gimmick of having an earache, so he couldn't go. So I put on, I didn't want to, Don brought us up there. I didn't want to tell him I didn't want to go either. So, and I did. I didn't know about the tunnel or the shaft. That's a good thing. Yeah, Don gave me the shaft. So anyway, we go down this thing, and it's well known. They've got a little rope tied up with hooks into the wall of the shaft. That you have this rope on the way down. There's about 20 feet down. There's a little area you can stop and get the air, get the oxygen, the nitrogen out of your system. You can stop there, and so you won't come up and get the bends from if you stay down below too long. So we went down to the bottom where the shaft ended. And like I say, maybe 100 feet. Well, Don had this hand flashlight that was pretty bright. Everything was just, it was dim a little bit, but the whole thing was to set up a rib. And the rib was, we got down to the bottom, and there was a room there about, maybe 10 feet across and 10 feet high and about 20 feet deep. And Don shone the flashlight into the room, and he signaled for me. He pointed at me like to go ahead and swim in there and take a look around. He signaled like pointed at his mask, and pointed out like, hey, go take a look in the room in there. So what are you going to say? No. So I went to take a look, and when I got down to the far end, he turned the flashlight off. Now, you want to talk about dark? There's no light anywhere.
Right.
And not only dark, what happened is when he did, I whirled around in a panic, and there's sediment, dust, not dust, but dirt, little dirt things that would be dust out in the open air, maybe 6 inches thick. And when I flailed around with my flippers and my hands turned around, I stirred up a whole, like, bushels of that stuff.
Oh, man. Yeah.
So that when he turned the light back on, I could just barely see it. And oh man, you talk about I had a hard time not totally panicking.
Bigger man than me, I would have said, "Yep, I'm a coward. I'm not going down there." I would never would have been down in there.
Oh no, I didn't. I don't recall ever asking Don to take me down there again. No, I certainly didn't. I didn't even at the time even realize it was a rib. I didn't think, why would anybody do that on purpose? He told me the light malfunction, of course, when I asked him about it.
Naturally.
But he was ribbing me, and yeah, so that's fine. I liked Don. He was, he put me over. And see, with Eduardo and, poor Cisco Grimaldo, we were working one of our matches. He grabbed a headlock, and we were about 5 feet away from the nearest corner. He punched me, and then he grabbed a headlock, and he ran my head in a turnbuckle on that, and then let go, and I sold it my head, it dazed me hitting the turnbuckle. So I grabbed the headlock again. He took off for the one across the opposite corner.
Right.
And it was a big ring, it was an 18-foot ring. So we're going halfway across, and I had no clue what he wanted to do. And then I thought about it. I'd seen it before. What I was supposed to do was shove him off. But by the time that came to me, we were only about 3 feet from the corner, and I shoved him. Remember when I told you the other day about Steve Williams, Dr. Death, grabbing my arm and picking me up, off my feet? I used the same amount of strength to launch because I was in a hurry. I wanted to do the spot. The poor guy only weighed about 210 pounds at the most. I had my hand in the small of his back. I launched him. The top turnbuckle hit him right under his throat. The middle turnbuckle hit him in the crotch, and his feet were about a foot off the ground.
And a ton of force behind him because you were so close to the corner.
Poor guy.
Yeah.
Oh, I felt so bad. But
I was curious how it was working with him because I was doing some research on Cisco, and it stated that, it looked like he broke in about a decade before this, but he worked a lot of years down there in Mexico for the EMLL and whatnot. And then he came up and started working the old Arizona territory for a couple of years before he finally came over here to Florida very recently by 69. So it didn't seem like he had a lot of United States American wrestling experience other than working Arizona before he came here. So I was just curious, how easy or hard it was working with him, and if there was, an issue with the language as well because he hadn't been here very long. But it sounds like the issue was on your end, not his.
Well, the only thing I remember is that bad move on my part, poor guy. So the matches must have been good. Okay. I don't remember him talking to me. I don't know what it was just by, there's ways you can work with guys without talking to them, just where you put your body in proximity and kind of lead them around by just having them follow you. I don't mean doing exactly what you're doing. I mean, matching your moves while you're facing them. Anyway, I remember the match was good. Now, there was another Hispanic wrestler named Pepe Gomez.
Yes, sir.
And I never worked with Pepe, and I think the reason why they didn't book us was because I don't think I think they knew he couldn't lead me in a match, and I didn't know how to lead yet. So they never booked me with him. That means that Cisco obviously did. But Pepe had a couple of funny stories. He came in the office one day, and he was kind of mild guy, but he was just, I think he was Mexican, but he was spitting mad, I said, what's the problem? He said, oh, they gave me a ticket. I said, what for? He said, I was speeding. I said, well, they pulled you over? He said, no. He said, I ran into a woman in her car. And I said, well, you did? You ran into a woman with your car? He said, yeah. I said, well, they should have given you a ticket for, something like that. He said, no, they get it for speeding. I said, are you sure they didn't give you, it was raining that day. He said, yeah, my tires skidded and I ran into her. I said, are you sure they didn't give you a ticket for going too fast for conditions? He said, no, it was for speeding. I wasn't speeding. I was only going 10 miles an hour. I said, but you still ran into a car, right? He said, well, yeah. I said, well, you're not supposed to run into other people's cars,
Right.
So you got a ticket because you ran into a car. Yeah, but I wasn't speeding. I couldn't get him to understand that the concept that, listen, for running into somebody's car, you're going to get some kind of ticket, But
maybe he should be happy with the speeding ticket. Could have been worse.
Well, they had one time they had a match on television. They put Cisco and Pepe together against each other. And they wanted to put Cisco over. They wanted to give him one on TV because he'd been on, I don't know, 50 times over a year, over the years. He'd been on a bunch of times doing, putting people over.
Yeah.
So they wanted to put him over. And Pepe wasn't real happy about it. Well, he wasn't happy with the idea that, he was having to do, lay down for a guy who laid down for everybody else. So he got kind of stiff in there. Cisco went to try to whip him in the corner, and he held on to the ropes and wouldn't let him whip him. So Cisco put him back in the corner, hit him with a couple of punches that perhaps weren't working punches.
Sure.
And gee, the next time he went to throw him in the corner, he went right along. He just sailed right in there.
Imagine that.
Pepe came in afterwards. He had a big knot on his forehead. And I said, gee, Pepe, what, you run to the ring or run the ring pole or what? He said, oh, no. He said, oh, he potatoed me. I said, gee, no kidding. I wonder why. But, yeah, he straightened right up. I mean, I had to admire Cisco. There's ways to get guys to work without having to, throw up your hands and say, I quit and walk out of the ring.
Right, yeah.
So, I appreciate all those guys. If any of them are around or any of the relatives happen to be hearing this, let me say that this is one retired wrestler that appreciates, because any stature that I gained in my career began with people like Cisco and Smasher Sloan and people like that, and Hans Mortier, who went out there and, they laid down for me. They put, I could have beaten for real, but that was just horrible.
Right.
More people go to see in Mexico City at the Olympics, the wrestling. They had a building that seated about 5,000 people. It never would sell out. But the pro wrestling down there on TV, they had a building that seat 25 people. It was always sold out for lucha libre, pro wrestling. But amateur wrestling is boring, unless you're a wrestling fan. An amateur wrestling fan. Usually it's family and friends who are the ones in the audience or former wrestlers. But it's kind of discipline that's not, it doesn't have any drama to it because nobody gets hurt. In amateur wrestling, it's all about not hurting people. So unless you really are keen on amateur wrestling, it wouldn't hold any interest to you. So I appreciate the guys that put me over. Otherwise, I wouldn't have had the career. And later on, when I became a heel and worked as a heel, I wasn't a job guy in terms of like, that's all I did. I made the matches, and probably if I worked with, say, Rocky Johnson 10 times, he would beat me 8 of those times. And the only 2 I won, I cheated somehow by hitting him with a gimmick or holding his tights or something. I never beat him fair and square, right, because that's the way it goes. If you have the bad guys winning, fans are not going to keep coming to see that. They don't want the bad guys to win. Now, some do, but most of them don't.
Right. Especially back in those days.
Yeah. Now there's a lot of heel fans, So, some of the best baby faces. You imagine Dick the Bruiser was a baby face? But he was for a while in Indianapolis.
He certainly was.
He'd been heel. Mm-hmm. He'd been heel so long that, when you get somebody like that as a babyface, the fans go crazy because they say, well, we got this monster now. It's like Darth Vader turns the good guy, and now right, you got him on the side of good. He's going to go and kill the bad guys now. Anyway, how we doing?
It's a very good point. No, you're doing great. I love the comments you made there. Hopefully, we do reach a few wrestlers that may still be around, or at least some of their family members, or maybe somebody gets word to some of their family members that, here's Bob Roop talking about maybe they want to hear these great stories about a Pepe Gomez or a Smasher Sloan or Cisco or anything, any of these guys like that. So that's very cool that you're able to share all these different stories. You have something to say about everyone to some degree. So some of the names I have on my list, I was probably going to name them, but I didn't know if you would have anything to say, and you're bringing them up yourself, which is totally cool. Like Pepe Gomez here on my list, but I didn't know if you would have anything to say because I didn't really see any, that you were working against him. You explained why, so that makes total sense there. But I guess we're kind of running long. We're not really running long. We're just about that normal time we end the show, but I wanted to get one more name in if you got the time, Bob.
Sure.
And everybody's like dying in suspense, this big name, and I hate to put him down like that because it's not a Ric Flair, it's not a Luthez, guys, but you had mentioned traveling with this guy a little bit there early on in your career along with Sputnik Monroe, and I'm talking about Sonny King. He'd only broken in the year prior to you, and he gets a lot of flack for never really being the best in the ring, the best technical worker, if you will. But do you have any early Sonny King memories, any anecdotes about Sonny King?
Oh, man, I wish I did. I only knew him when I was hanging around with Sputnik, and It was a period of probably a month. And I heard some things, and Sonny, don't get me wrong, we got along fine, but we didn't hang out together when Sputnik wasn't around. He was our common denominator.
Gotcha.
But so no, I really don't. But I do want to go back and say something.
Okay.
Not just guys from my generation. I want to talk to today's generation of wrestlers. Guys and girls out there, anybody, promoters, anybody that's helping you with your product and for you being successful personally, you should be grateful because they don't have to do it. I mean, maybe you think, well, they do because the only way they're going to get booked is, to do a job for me or whatever. But is that really the best reason to have someone work for you? By showing appreciation, you'll get people working for you that have a lot better attitude if you respect them and you're grateful. And if you aren't and you don't, you can expect, nothing but negative feedback. I see a lot of stuff on Facebook. I'm going through a lot of stuff. I see a lot of stuff about today's wrestling. I see a lot of negative commentary about people's attitudes. It's just a shame because, I'm not real familiar with it, so maybe I'm being out of line here a little bit. But just be appreciative of your good fortune. If you have somebody help you out, when people go out there in the ring, they're risking their health. It's very easy to get hurt. So they're taking a risk to help you out. So be appreciative. That's all I wanted to say about that.
Oh, very well said. Thank you very much for chiming in on that to today's world. But I think a lot of that too goes back to just society today and how people think, and their behavior has just changed quite a bit over the last several decades, for better or worse. That's really up to, I guess, somebody else to decide other than me. But I feel exactly what you're saying there, and it's very cool that you were able to share something like that with not just, it doesn't just go with what happened back in the 70s and 80s, but that goes to today because wrestling's still wrestling. Yes, a lot of things have changed. The matches are put together very differently and things of that nature. Yes, we know it's a work and all this good stuff now, but it's still, at the end of the day, these guys are giving you their body it's up to the boss to say you're doing the job tonight, but at the same time, they're doing the job tonight. They're helping you out the best way they can. So, and if people are doing it right, like, the veterans, if they're doing it right, maybe a Chris Jericho or something like that. I know he gets a lot of flack for putting himself over and stuff, but I have to go with him because of the youngsters that he wrestles with anyway. At least they're trying to help get you over for the next generation.
Well, if you think about, if you're sick medically and you need help and someone donated blood and it saved your life or helped you at least recover somewhat, I think you'd be grateful to them. Well, think about your career. The people that help you, when you beat somebody, you take whatever stature they had. And sometimes you have to, it might be they have a great body. So when, they don't have a reputation, but they look great. So when you beat somebody who looks strong and capable. And the work it took them to get that body is what helps you do that. So all their work and all that, they're sacrificing their own fame and their own credibility on that to add to yours. It's just like a blood transfusion for your career. And you should look at it that way and think about it, because it's not a minor thing that people are giving you. They're giving you part of their personal stature, and they're willing to give it to you so you can carry it and make some money for yourself with it. So I look back at guys from my generation that took it for granted, and frankly, the affection and respect that I have for someone like JYD, who did have appreciation for people who helped him. It's not there for others. I mean, I wish it was. I don't hold a grudge, but when I think about them, they gave me no reason to respect them or to, appreciate them. Mm-hmm. Working with them was all take, and it wasn't two-sided. And I didn't ask them to give back their stature. I just put appreciation would be nice. So,
right.
Okay, I've lectured enough. I'll get off the soapbox.
Very well said. Very much appreciated, man. It's very cool to hear this stuff because it needs to be said, I think. And words of wisdom here, guys. So listen up, youngsters. You guys, well, maybe not so much youngsters too. There's a lot of people that just never learn, like you said. But yeah, thanks so much, Bob, for all of that and all the great stories here this week, especially the Terry Funk stories. They were all fun. Don't get me wrong, but the Terry Funk stories stole the show. I'm sure for everyone that was listening, but certainly for me. And I just appreciate you being here again this week, getting another one out. But the next time we return, Bob, it's going to be Thanksgiving Eve.
Wow. Well, thank you, Ray. I mean, I'm almost not frustrated, but I'm eager. There's so much to talk about. We've got years to do it, but I start getting some of the stuff out, and then these other things come welling up, and I'm eager to share them too. So
sure,
we've got some good stuff to look forward to, and I really appreciate that we're doing it together.
Absolutely. And as always, guys, remember Bob, you can find Bob Roop on Facebook. Look him up, friend him. And if you have any questions, you can send them to wrestlecopia@gmail.com or DM me on Facebook, facebook.com/wrestlinggrenade. You can also follow me on Twitter, or the old X as they call it now, at Wrestling Grenade. That's at RASSLIN Grenade. Of course, I have been your co-host, Ray Russell, along for the ride for Mr. Bob Roop. Bob, thank you again for another fun journey throughout wrestling history. Can't wait to do it again next week.
Thank you, Ray. Me too. I'm looking forward to our next play together.